Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I have a special guest with me, Caitlin Long, who is a 22-year Wall Street veteran, also the co-founder of the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition. A lot of great things happening in Wyoming with specific blockchain bills being passed. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Caitlin, as I just mentioned, exciting things happening in Wyoming, and you've been
Yeah.
leading the charge there, and folks are very happy with your work, and we really appreciate you being so proactive and taking steps to help further the blockchain and crypto market. But I think what folks will want to understand from your perspective, why are you bullish on crypto and blockchain?
Well, to me, this solves, it actually makes me optimistic that we don't have to be trapped in the status quo financial system. We actually now have a real alternative. Up until Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, really for financial assets, we were all trapped in either the existing banking system or the securities markets. Otherwise, you could buy land or, collectibles, precious metals, et cetera, and be out of the system. But for most people, most of our wealth really has been in the financial system, and we've been trapped in a system that I discovered it actually really isn't inherently fair. There's a lot about it that's not
Sure.
fair. And I think a lot of folks intuitively understand that there are things that are wrong, right? The fact that nobody went to jail for the financial crisis, despite the fact that most folks would probably agree that some of that behavior, not all of it, but some of it was criminal, and nobody went to jail. So intuitively, people know something's wrong.
Yes.
And that's where I can help explain. I think in general, the people on Wall Street are well-meaning. I think a lot of the things that went wrong are systemic and market structure related. And the great thing about blockchain is it fixes all of those problems. And that's what makes me optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a disruptive technology, and I think very timely. As you said, it seems we're headed down a path of just the same status quo, and it's snowballing, and who knows what can happen in the future. But I'm very excited that this technology can, like you said, can help solve these problems.
Indeed.
Now, speaking of Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, 13 bills passed, which is amazing. Can you give us an overview of the coalition as well as some of the bills that were passed?
Well, we're all volunteers. We're a ragtag group. There's not a lot of infrastructure, as some folks have discovered. Somebody said Wyoming is America's emerging market, and I think that's right. It's kind of a blank slate. It doesn't have a lot of economic development infrastructure, and there aren't a lot of we don't even have a very good website, to be honest, because we're just volunteers. It's a ragtag group, but we've crowdsourced this effort, and that's part of what's made it so effective. It is unheard of to get 13 bills passed in one topic in in two legislative sessions last year and this year. That just doesn't happen. And what Wyoming did is spotted an opportunity to be out first in this market, which has such strong cultural overlap with Wyoming's culture. Wyoming's got a very rugged individualist, good fences make good neighbors, low tax kind of infrastructure or culture rather. And as you can tell, that's got a lot of overlap with the ethos of the blockchain industry in general. And so we're setting ourselves up. The 13 bills basically say at a high level, there's no tax on any crypto. Crypto to crypto transactions are exempt from the money transmitter law in Wyoming. Utility tokens are not securities under state law. Of course, federal law, as we all know, in securities trumps state, but in commercial and property law, state law trumps federal. So those are last year's bills. This year's bills, the big one is that we defined under commercial law, which again is controlled by state law, that all crypto assets are property under commercial law, and we gave them what's called super negotiability. We mapped virtual currencies to the same commercial law rules as money, which this is going to get a little esoteric, but it's really foundational stuff. It means that when you buy Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency or other virtual currencies like Litecoin and Bcash and the like, that you don't have to worry about checking to see if there was a previous lien on that asset. And as a lot of folks in the technology world are scratching their heads thinking, why on earth are the lawyers talking about this?
Yeah.
Because it very much could be a problem in the future that you bought a Bitcoin and didn't realize there was a valid lien against it, and a judge might actually try to enforce that against you. And as more Bitcoin lending is taking place, we now know there's a lot of that going on. The risk that you bought a Bitcoin that might have actually had an enforceable lien against it goes up. And this is just going to become, it's an edge case problem, but it's really foundational stuff. We've now defined it as property. We've now defined how you what's called perfect a security interest against it. I'm probably losing your audience because this is legal geek stuff, but it is important stuff. And
yes.
A lot of folks I think also kind of intuitively think, wait a minute, code is law. But the reality is that technology has to be backwards compatible, as Trace Mayer says, to the legal system in which it operates. And what Wyoming has done here is make blockchain technology backwards compatible to the legal system. And then also we put in a financial technology sandbox that allows any operator to do anything as long as it's not going to hurt consumers for up to 3 years. So you're exempt. You have to apply, but you're exempt from financial regulations for up to 3 years as long as you get the go-ahead from the regulators. So that's a pretty powerful concept as well, that all existing financial regulations, except for those that are designed to protect consumers, you can innovate around those as long as you check the box. It's important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, wow, some of the stuff I didn't even personally think about. You guys are definitely ahead of the curve and forward thinking here, because you're right. As this matures and grows and it looks like it's going to be positioned as a new asset class, there's going to be a lot of legal issues and a lot of things like you mentioned, like liens against that, cryptos. I didn't even think about then with the lending aspect. So, wow. Very forward thinking, and I think it's definitely important. You're setting really the blueprint, so to speak, I think, for many other states.
Yeah, I think so too. And one thing I might just add, Wyoming, of course, made it very logically easy to create a lien against the asset. The way you do that is you control it. So I think the engineers out there who are listening to you are going to be like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. So as long as you control it, you actually have what's called the perfected security interest. And then the next thing we did, which may make everybody scratch heads, is under the law, under commercial law, what's called a possessory security interest, which is where you control the asset, is actually superior to any other security interest, which again is logical with how blockchains work. But here's the thing. We made it very easy to locate the assets in Wyoming. That's where a lot of folks are going to be like, wait a minute, how do you locate a digital asset in Wyoming? Well, we made it really, really easy to get the hook into Wyoming jurisdiction. And so there's so many other details. I don't want to bore everybody, but lawyers will geek out on this. Andrea Tiniano just wrote for lawyers, and anyone who's interested in digging deeper, there's a great article she put out on Forbes.com yesterday on this very topic.
Wow, very cool. I mean, kudos to you guys for all the great work you've done there and got 13 bills passed. So on that note, have you seen interest from businesses and different blockchain crypto companies, looking to come to Wyoming as a result?
Oh, yeah. I'm seeing what's going on. Well, first of all, when I put out the summary article, it was one of the most viewed articles on Forbes.com. In fact, so much so that Forbes' main website posted it. Wow. It's up to something just like 30,000 views, right? And the funny thing is my hometown in Wyoming was 25,000 people. So that kind of gives you a sense of just how just the reach of this. And I've seen it from the incoming inquiries. I think probably at this point, the most well-known company that's moved to Wyoming is IOHK, Charles Hoskinson of Cardano. Yes. But, there will be others. It's going to take time. It's not like a switch is going to flip. And all of a sudden overnight, you've got an influx. It's going to take time. A business doesn't relocate itself overnight. It's going to take time. But we've definitely seen an uptick in the number of businesses forming in the state of Wyoming, like new businesses, which is awesome.
Awesome. Well, congrats on that. That's definitely beneficial to the folks there in the community and the state as well. So have you seen other states, maybe other representatives of other states get interested in replicating what you guys did there?
Oh, yeah. I think we're up to now a total of 7 states that have either enacted or are in the process of enacting the utility token exemption bill. Just yesterday, Governor Polis, who used to be, when he was in Congress, the co-chairman of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, he's now governor of Colorado, and he just signed the Colorado utility token exemption bill yesterday. So now it's Arizona and Colorado, and I think Oklahoma and Iowa and Utah and a couple other states, Rhode Island, are also now considering it. And I think that one's likely to pass. And that's cool because, when bad federal laws need to get changed, there is a historical precedent that impetus for change bubbles up from the states.
Yes.
And, 7 states, if we can get those all through, that's a pretty big movement, in just 1 year, right? 7 of the 50 U.S. states, right? And this is all, again, organic crowdsourced stuff. So it's, I think that may help push Congress and the SEC to give the clarity that people need. It's so clear that federal securities laws have pushed companies offshore and have caused a lot of Americans to lose investment opportunities. Many of them were not going to turn out, but look, the vast majority of all startups fail, and yet Americans were excluded from most of those capital raising transactions because of the uncertainty about federal securities law.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm hoping that will get fixed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as the saying goes, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Right.
And we saw in the 90s, .com boom, your Googles, Amazon, the eBays that came out, but there was many that failed. But that's just the nature
and there
of
were frauds too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just the nature of the beast. It is what it is, and but we can't stifle innovation. But on your point, a lot of states are moving ahead and taking steps, and historically we've seen this type of movement that change federal law. We have the Token Taxonomy Act in play.
Yep.
So do you feel with more states coming together, with taking actions like these, will help influence or potentially have the Token Taxonomy Act passed?
Yeah, I actually, believe it or not, Congressman Davidson himself reached out to me, which is awesome. He's the main sponsor in Congress, and he's putting together a coalition of folks. And in fact, actually, if you've got listeners that live in New Jersey or California or Illinois, ping you and ping me, because they are looking for locals who are willing to make phone calls to help get co-sponsors. There is a higher probability that bill actually passes than I initially thought. They've cleared some important internal procedural hoops, and it is a bipartisan bill. Actually, yes. There's an equal number of sponsors from both political parties. So, how it goes, I don't know, right? It's nobody's holding their breath to get anything done in Congress. It's very clear the states have more freedom and flexibility to get things done. They're not as broken in their political processes as the federal government is. But look, I think that the 2 messages have gotten through. One is, it's ridiculous that you have to trigger capital gains tax reporting every time you buy a cup of coffee with a cryptocurrency. And so that one of the things that the Token Taxonomy Act is doing is putting a $600 de minimis exemption into that bill. And then the other one is that it basically follows the Wyoming Utility Token Act and saying there are 3 different types of cryptocurrencies. One is virtual currencies. The other is digital securities, which are, of course, securities. And then the third is digital consumer tokens. That's the Wyoming taxonomy. I'm not sure. I think Congress is using a different title for utility tokens, but it's the same concept. And that's becoming an accepted classification around the world. Switzerland was the first one to use it, so it's been in force in Switzerland, the 3 groupings, for I think now about 15 months. And so it's not a shock that Congress would do that, but that would be pretty significant for those that are selling tokens that are not necessarily securities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the entire crypto market is anxiously awaiting to see what happens with that if it gets passed. And I know, you mentioned that the $600 exemption for transactions below $600, that would be ideal with, for example, Backed, which is partnering with Starbucks.
With Starbucks,
yeah,
sure.
and looking to do this exactly what you're saying. So wow, I think fingers crossed, and everyone, as Caitlin mentioned, definitely paying Caitlin and myself. We'll look to do some organization here and get in contact with local representatives to help move the needle.
That's great. There are some people in Congress who get it. It may be a small number, but look, the fact that we pulled this off in Wyoming just shows that grassroots efforts really do matter, and nobody wants to block innovation or be accused of blocking innovation. So I think there's a better chance than you might have realized that something got through Congress. And if you've heard me give podcasts recently, I've been very skeptical that will be, actually pass in Congress. And after talking with Congressman Davidson and his staff this week, it's not as low probability as I thought.
Got it.
I'm still not holding my breath, but it's not a waste of time for people to help get it over the finish line.
Absolutely. I think we just got to keep fighting the good fight.
Yep.
Awesome. Now, being a Wall Street veteran, 22 years. And, what is your, from your perspective, having been in those circles, and we're seeing some of the Wall Street players like your Fidelities, ICE backed, TD Ameritrade, ErisX, how do you envision, or what do you see, how's Wall Street going to interact with this market more? Do you see them building out more services, more investment firms, hedge funds, and so forth, launching crypto investment products and so forth?
Well, I've been writing since I think the Backed announcement came out. It is definitively a double-edged sword. There are good things about it, and there are also really bad things about it. And candidly, I don't think we need Wall Street to get Bitcoin to tip, so to speak, and become widely accepted and adopted.
Right.
There are things about what Wall Street will be doing that will be accelerating it. Candidly, I think the involvement of the traditional long-only buy-side firms like Fidelity, the mutual fund companies. I'm not talking about hedge funds. I'm talking about mutual fund companies.
Sure.
Those that have a longer-term, more stable, less trading-focused, less sharky, shark-like approach to the markets. I think they've got it right. If you look at what they've said publicly, and if you look at the engagement of their team on crypto Twitter, they very clearly are going to be approaching this market in a manner that's consistent with the technology. With, we're not going to play three-card Monte by taking Bitcoins off into a second layer and, God knows whether there's actually Bitcoin there, as we unfortunately discovered most recently with Quadriga.
Right.
I think there are probably a lot more of those out there than we realize. And, a big company like Fidelity putting its weight behind a solvent Bitcoin custody market is I think, really important. And with that in mind, one of the things Wyoming did for custody, again, a lot of the core crypto folks are like, why would I ever want to custody my coins?
Yeah.
Well, the institutional investors are required by law to do that. And so how do you do that in a manner that's consistent with the ethos of the technology? Answer what Wyoming came up with, which is in a Wyoming digital asset custodian, the customer never loses ownership of the asset. They still are direct owners of the asset. What they're doing is giving up control. And the control, of course, is a private key. So, but the challenge is with the custodian, they cannot do anything with the private key unless they're specifically directed to do it by the customer.
Right.
So that's how you split the hair of, we can have a digital asset custodian, but you're not in a debtor-creditor relationship with the custodian. And that custodian is not doing anything behind the scenes, playing three-card Monte with your assets, and you having to wonder whether the custodian is actually solvent. And in fact, actually, one of the ways that you can get custody in a digital asset custodian in Wyoming, which again, those will be the first ones I think can open their doors later this fall. I think it's around September 1st.
Right.
That at the earliest. It'll probably take more time than that, but realistically, one of the things is you can actually get your same UTXOs back. If you choose bailment as a non-fungible asset. So essentially that'd be effectively they store your actual private keys for your actual UTXOs on an HSM or a hardware wallet or something and then give it back to you.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the ways that you can choose custody in Wyoming. And, that is, again, I think as your listeners listen, the whole concept of custody and, third party is a security hole. I completely agree with that. The challenges with institutional investors, they are coming. And so we are going to have to try to find a way to make custody fair and solvent and respect the nature of the technology. And I think we did it in Wyoming. Generally speaking, for retail, I would never recommend that you keep your coins at a third party. But for mutual funds and 401ks, unfortunately, by law, they have to. So let's create a custodian that doesn't exist today that is actually consistent with how the technology works, and that's what we did in Wyoming. All of the owners will have what's called a bailment, which allows them. It's like valet parking for your car. You're literally just giving up control, but not ownership of your asset. It's the way custody should work,
right? And
it doesn't work that way in the securities market today, for sure.
Wow, you guys are certainly ahead of the curve. I mean, this is so insightful, and I hope other states follow suit and replicate it to the T. I mean, very, very cool. So on that note, what else can we expect from the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition? Obviously, you've done a lot already, but we're just, as far as 2019, if you can give us heads up on anything that's in the works.
Well, we do have one more year on the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force, which is a governor-appointed legislative task force. And we've already had 3 really good ideas that folks have brought to us. They're more what I would consider refinements. They're not, big changes in the law, because we already did the big changes. The really big changes went through last year and this year. So we will be continuing to refine these laws. I think I was reading an article about South Dakota, which created the best trust laws in the United States a couple decades ago. And on average, they've had 3 bills a year going through pertaining to their trust laws to keep them the most competitive. I think you're going to see that in Wyoming as well. But it's refinements. It's things. We did pass a bill last year to recognize blockchain shares in an uncertificated manner. And this year, because of ERC 884, there were a number of people who said, can you give us legal clarity that what we're doing is also legal for certificated blockchain shares? So we did. So now in Wyoming, both certificated and uncertificated blockchain securities are legal. But one of the things we didn't do is address municipal bonds, for example.
Got it.
So that's more of what I would suggest as a refinement as opposed to wholesale change.
Sure.
The big wholesale changes, I think you've already seen most of them, and they are really big. It's going to take it's probably going to take a year for the legal community to really dig in and understand just how significant what Wyoming did really is. Amazing stuff.
And finally, obviously this is not financial or investment advice. What's your personal outlook on the crypto market? Maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, as far as adoptions. And I know we touched a bit on, it depends on regulations and regulatory clarity, I should say. But, from your personal perspective, where do you see things?
Well, you are going to see more institutional involvement. And again, I'm on the front lines fighting to have that institutional involvement be solvent and not playing these rehypothecation and, musical chairs, 3-card Monte kind of games behind the scenes in the second layer omnibus accounts. So that's what the securities industry does. This is exactly why I'm so attracted to blockchain technology, because blockchain technology solves all of those problems. We don't have to trade off the ledger accuracy, the clear property rights for market liquidity, which is what the securities industry does. And it's, the traditional securities industry is so far gone in that regard. It's not really fixable. So let's create this parallel financial system that is rising and is clearly in the process of being created between, starting with institutional involvement in Bitcoin. We are going to see more of that. Yeah. Again, double-edged sword. I think stable coins is an awesome concept. And, the execution is probably not as good as the idea so far. But that doesn't mean, that we're only a couple years into the concept of stable coins, right? People will get it right. And institutional money will start ending up in stable coins for institutional trades as well. I'm really, really excited about the concept of digital securities. They are going to really be a big deal. It's going to start with private securities first, which is what's happening now.
Right.
And then I think it'll move to the bond market, and then eventually, probably 10 years from now, plus maybe 20, it'll end up moving to publicly traded equities. But this is going to solve a lot of the problems in the securities market that you've heard me talking about in the past, about the ledger inaccuracies and irregularities in ownership records that are just inherent in the way the legal system works. And again, as we talked about in the beginning, most people would think that those things should be illegal, but they're not. They're actually legal, and that's why no one's gone to jail. So if we just build up this parallel blockchain-based financial system, then if somebody does try to pull those games, they will go to jail, and it will be classic fraud. But right now, the old system, as far as I'm concerned, is too far gone to fix. Let's build up the new one. And I think in the next couple of years, we're just going to see a continued growth in innovation and actually getting more assets issued on these platforms. And it's going to be awesome. Wow.
Caitlin, so much insightful information. And so much exciting things happening. And, thank you for leading this charge and obviously starting Wyoming, but also moving to other areas as well. I think the crypto community really appreciates you. And we would love to have you back on to discuss, new developments around the Blockchain Coalition. And folks, as Caitlin mentioned, get in contact with your local representatives, and you can, I'll help to organize a few things. You can also contact Caitlin. I will place a link to her website in the description of the video. Be sure to check it out and get in contact with her. Caitlin, once again, thank you so much. Very much appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.